King Charles had opened countless red boxes, signed historic orders, and endured private crises without allowing the room to see him break. But when a newly recovered vault register was placed before him, the monarch stopped turning the pages. His face tightened. His hand remained suspended above one handwritten instruction, an instruction connecting Camilla to a secret attempt to prevent Prince George from receiving a protected family inheritance. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Archivists had discovered the missing register during an inventory inside Windsor Castle, hidden beneath an obsolete document case. The restricted family vault was a secured chamber holding heirlooms and records, while the ledger listed trusts and bequests across 3 generations. This was not ceremonial paperwork. It governed memories and promises meant to survive long after their owners were gone. The recovered entry was specific. Camilla had authorized a draft instruction seeking to suspend George's beneficiary status within the Windsor Family Heirloom Trust. That trust was a private legal arrangement controlling when designated relatives could receive family assets. Under the proposed change, the prince could inherit nothing until a trustee connected to her household approved its release. Charles read the passage twice, lowered the page, and said nothing. An equerry watched disbelief harden into devastation as the king recognized her mark. William arrived, summoned without explanation. Charles pushed the register across the table and told his son that George's future had been discussed behind their backs. The prince did not shout. He remained still, wounded that his child had become a bargaining point inside his own family. When William asked what could have been withheld, his father opened the attached memorandum. The answer reached far beyond jewels. The restriction covered private investments, family properties, sealed letters from Queen Elizabeth II, and objects associated with Prince Philip. Those items mattered because they were meant to give George a human connection to relatives whose lives would otherwise reach him only through history. Blocking them would not simply reduce an inheritance, it would interrupt a carefully protected bond between generations. Then Charles noticed the date. Camilla's instruction had entered the record while he was undergoing treatment and carrying fewer duties, suggesting the plan had advanced when his attention was weakest. William leaned closer, anger finally breaking through his silence. Yet before either man could demand an explanation, the king saw another signature beneath hers. He recognized it instantly. Someone trusted by the entire family had helped move the plan forward, and discovering why would expose what George's inheritance truly meant to everyone now trapped inside the crisis. To the outside world, Prince George's inheritance might have sounded like wealth beyond imagination. Inside the family, however, it represented something far more fragile. Handwritten messages from his great-grandmother, objects carried by generations of monarchs, and a private promise that one day he would understand where he came from. Blocking that inheritance was therefore not merely financial. It threatened to sever a child from the emotional history prepared for him. William understood exactly why those private possessions mattered. George's family trust had been created to protect keepsakes and investments separately from the crown estate. The collection of royal land and property managed for the monarchy rather than owned personally by individual royals. The boy's collection did not represent public wealth or an automatic reward for becoming king. It held the pieces of family history meant to help him understand the human lives behind the crown. Charles had personally strengthened that connection. The king had placed his childhood journal inside the collection, along with a miniature naval compass associated with Prince Philip, and sealed recordings intended for George when he reached adulthood. These objects carried little constitutional power, yet they possessed enormous emotional value. They could allow a future monarch to hear familiar voices, touch private memories, and discover the fears and hopes his relatives had never shared publicly. William returned to Adelaide Cottage, with the recovered register still dominating his thoughts. The family residence near Windsor offered him privacy from official palace life, but it could not protect him from what he now knew. He found George completing his schoolwork at the kitchen table and stopped in the doorway. The prince wanted to cross the room and promised that nothing would ever be taken from his son. Instead, he remained silent, unable to explain that adults within the family had tried to place conditions around the child's future. Catherine noticed her husband's clenched hand before he spoke. When William finally described the instruction, she looked toward George and lowered her voice. The princess was not furious about money. She was devastated because her child had been treated as a bargaining piece before he was old enough to understand the dispute, much less defend himself from it. Her anger was quiet, but it cut deeply. Charles faced an equally brutal choice. Defending his grandson could expose Camilla, while protecting his wife would make the monarch complicit through silence. The queen consort still did not know the register had surfaced. As she attended an afternoon engagement, a palace aide repeatedly tried to reach her, and each unanswered call narrowed the distance between ignorance and confrontation. Then an older documented vault entry changed everything. It connected Camilla's instruction to one explosive conversation at Balmoral, the royal family's private Scottish residence. The plan had not begun with paperwork. It had begun with wounded pride, and what was said that night would make the coming confrontation inevitable. The plan did not begin in a lawyer's office or beneath the cold lights of the Windsor vault. It began months earlier at Balmoral, after a family dinner that had already exposed dangerous divisions. One remark about George's future turned an uncomfortable evening into a private struggle over bloodlines, loyalty, and control. By midnight, Camilla had asked a question no one present would ever forget, and one advisor had agreed to answer it. William had begun reviewing which private heirlooms would eventually pass to his children. The prince considered the exercise responsible planning, especially because the collection contained personal bequests that could not simply be replaced. Camilla saw something different. She believed the review would strengthen George's place within the next generation while leaving her own grandchildren outside the family's most protected circle. Charles dismissed the early tension as a household disagreement. The king trusted the trustees, the individuals legally responsible for protecting the collection, to preserve every existing arrangement. He never imagined that wounded pride could become a formal instruction affecting his grandson. That mistake mattered because his calm response allowed private resentment to grow without challenge. The breaking point came after dinner at Balmoral, the royal family's private Scottish residence. Camilla asked William whether her grandchildren would receive anything comparable to George's protected collection. The future king chose his words carefully. He explained that the trust contained direct family bequests and could not be redistributed merely to make every branch feel equal. His answer was calm, but she heard rejection. Camilla felt every eye at the table move toward her. The queen consort said nothing more, yet humiliation followed her long after the family separated for the night. When the corridors became quiet, she entered the library and met Charles's private property advisor, beside the dying fireplace. She asked whether George's access could be delayed until every family interest had been properly balanced. The advisor hesitated before answering. He explained that the inheritance could not simply be removed, but a temporary beneficiary suspension might be proposed if the trustees believed future disputes threatened the collection. Such a suspension would pause George's right to receive the assets without permanently erasing his name. That narrow possibility was all Camilla needed. She instructed the official to prepare the mechanism quietly and keep it outside the regular briefing cycle, the normal system through which important matters reached the king. A handwritten vault note preserved the exchange. The documented account recorded her instruction in precise language, and the advisor's countersignature matched the second name Charles had discovered beneath Camilla's authorization at Windsor. Nothing about it was accidental. Nothing was merely administrative. Charles reconstructed the Balmoral encounter from those pages and felt disbelief become cold resolve. The king ordered his wife into the private audience room, a chamber used for confidential meetings, and commanded every aide to remain outside. The hidden history had found its voice. Now Camilla would have to deny it, defend it, or reveal something even more painful. Camilla entered the private audience room expecting a difficult conversation about household paperwork. Instead, she found Charles standing beside a table with the recovered register open between them. No secretaries, lawyers, or sympathetic courtiers remained to soften the collision. The king waited until the door closed, touched the marked authorization with one finger, and asked the question that stripped away every defense. "Did you try to take this from George?" Charles had dismissed the attendants because he wanted an answer as a husband and grandfather, before responding as sovereign. The private audience room was a secluded palace chamber, reserved for confidential meetings, where sensitive words could remain beyond the wider household. Across the table, the monarch had arranged the vault register, legal memorandum, and handwritten Balmoral note in chronological order. Camilla looked down and recognized every page. Camilla did not challenge the records or call them false. The queen consort admitted during that private conversation that she had requested the suspension, but insisted it was meant to be temporary. She claimed resentment between the family's blended branches could eventually explode around George's protected collection. Delaying his access, she argued, would create time to reach a fairer arrangement. Yet fairness sounded painfully different to the grandfather standing opposite her. Charles removed his glasses and set them down with trembling fingers. The king told her that George was a child, not a negotiating position to be moved, until everyone else felt satisfied. His voice remained controlled, but the hurt beneath it was unmistakable. The scheme mattered because it had targeted a boy who possessed neither the knowledge nor the power to defend the memories prepared for him. Camilla's composure cracked when Charles mentioned the date. He accused her of advancing the plan while illness had reduced his workload and divided his attention. She pushed her chair backward, insisting she had tried to prevent another inheritance war rather than attack his grandson. The monarch did not accept that distinction. To him, secrecy had transformed her explanation into betrayal. Charles then asked who else knew. Camilla admitted that the private property advisor had contacted an outside barrister, an independent senior lawyer asked to prepare specialist legal arguments. A preliminary trust amendment already existed, meaning a draft change to George's inheritance protections had moved beyond private conversation. It lacked final trustee approval, but it was real, written, and waiting. William entered only after she agreed to face him. The prince placed George's childhood photograph beside the register and asked why his son alone had been singled out. Camilla looked at the image, then back at him. She said the decision had never belonged entirely to her, because the proposal relied upon an obscure clause supported by an authority even Charles could not casually overrule. The admission changed the battle. The confrontation had exposed Camilla's intention, but 3 silent trustees would decide whether that intention could ever become reality. Royal titles could command a room, but they could not automatically rewrite a private trust. George's future now rested with 3 trustees, whose signatures carried more practical power than the anger of a king. Behind a closed mahogany door, they examined the proposed amendment line by line. Outside, William waited beside a silent clock, knowing that his son's inheritance might depend upon people trained to ignore emotion, even when an entire family was breaking around them. Charles had requested immediate intervention, yet the monarch could not erase a proposal once it had entered formal review. The Windsor Family Heirloom Trust required unanimous approval, before any direct beneficiary could be suspended. In plain terms, every trustee had to agree before George's access could be delayed. That safeguard mattered because it prevented one powerful relative from controlling property intended for another. Three people now held that authority. A senior family solicitor examined the legal language, while an independent fiduciary, a professional required to protect the beneficiary rather than obey the family, tested whether the proposal served George's interests. Princess Anne occupied the third seat as custodian of the late Queen's archival wishes, meaning she was responsible for protecting Elizabeth II's private instructions and records. Anne opened the Balmoral note and became visibly cold. The Princess Royal remembered her mother warning that younger generations must inherit memories, without affection becoming a contest for influence. She read Camilla's instruction again, then placed it beside the proposed amendment. To her, the issue was no longer family rivalry. Someone had tried to turn love, history, and grief into leverage. William remained in the corridor and declined every offer of coffee. The prince kept his eyes on the closed door as the clock moved forward. When Catherine called, he answered immediately. She told him George was safely asleep and knew nothing about the struggle surrounding his name. His voice softened, but only briefly. Protecting the boy's innocence mattered, because once he learned that his inheritance had become a battlefield, no legal ruling could restore that lost security. The solicitor discovered the weakness first. Camilla's draft relied upon a family disharmony clause, a trust provision designed to freeze assets during an active legal dispute. No lawsuit existed, no formal claim had been filed. The supposed threat had been built around a conflict that had never legally begun, meaning the proposal lacked the foundation required to survive. Anne then broke the silence by producing a sealed instruction from Elizabeth II. The documented directive stated that no spouse entering through marriage could delay a direct descendant's inheritance merely to equalize separate family branches. The independent fiduciary read it twice. The family solicitor closed the amendment. All three trustees rejected the suspension. William finally breathed, but relief lasted only seconds. Their ruling triggered an immediate audit, and the first inventory check exposed something terrifying. 2 objects assigned to George were already missing from their registered locations. His legal protection had survived, but the empty spaces inside the vault proved the plan had moved beyond paperwork. The amendment was dead, but the crisis was not. When custodians opened the 2 cases assigned to Prince George, they found velvet impressions where heirlooms should have rested. One compartment had held Prince Philip's compass. The other contained a sealed collection of Elizabeth II's messages. Their disappearance changed the atmosphere instantly. What had looked like a failed legal maneuver now felt physical, deliberate, and frighteningly close to completion. Charles ordered an immediate audit of every object listed in the recovered register. The audit was a complete official check, comparing each item's recorded location with where it could actually be found. Access logs, transfer slips, key records, and security schedules were gathered before anyone connected to the vault could leave the palace grounds. George's rights had survived on paper, but 2 missing possessions proved that paperwork alone had never protected him. Charles then approved a restriction against Camilla's private office. Her household lost all authority to request transfers from the family vault until the investigation ended. The decision was administrative, meaning it changed internal access rather than her public title or ceremonial position. Yet its emotional meaning was unmistakable. The king no longer trusted his wife's staff around the objects prepared for his grandson. Camilla received the notice while sitting alone in her dressing room. The queen consort read the final paragraph, removed her glasses, and folded the paper once. She did not summon an aide or demand that the restriction be reversed. As footsteps disappeared along the corridor, she stared at the closed door and understood that the separation inside her marriage had become official. Charles moved into his study and cancelled their scheduled dinner. When an aide asked whether another place should be prepared, the monarch answered no. He remained beside the window with the untouched register beneath his hand. Protecting George had brought him relief, but discovering the missing objects had replaced that relief with suspicion. Someone had begun carrying out the plan before the trustees could stop it. Security records delivered the first breakthrough. Both missing items had been transferred to a conservation room under an authorization code linked to the private property advisor. A conservation room was a secure space where delicate objects were examined and preserved. The heirlooms had not left Windsor, but their catalog numbers had been temporarily changed, making them harder to trace through the normal inventory. The advisor confessed during a recorded security interview. He admitted that Camilla wanted the objects held separately until George's beneficiary review ended. He also acknowledged deleting an electronic transfer request, believing the removal would erase the trail. The handwritten register had preserved what the computer no longer showed. William demanded immediate punishment when Charles told him what the interview contained. The prince saw concealment, altered records, and a direct threat to his son's legacy. Yet the king asked him to wait one night. Before signing a final order, the monarch needed to speak with his son privately, without titles, lawyers, or witnesses. With the heirlooms recovered and trust shattered, they had to decide whether justice meant punishment, protection, or both. Late that evening, Charles and William met alone in the king's study. No red boxes waited on the desk, and no aide stood near the door. For once, the argument was not about protocol or succession. It was about a grandfather who had failed to see danger approaching, and a father determined that his child would never become collateral in an adult struggle. What passed between them transformed anger into a decision. Charles broke the silence first. During their private conversation, the king admitted that he had noticed Camilla's resentment, but refused to confront it, because doing so would have exposed fractures within his marriage. He had convinced himself that the trustees would stop any dangerous proposal. Now he understood that his silence had allowed a personal grievance to reach George's inheritance and threaten objects carrying the family's most intimate memories. William listened without interrupting. The prince said he did not want Camilla publicly humiliated, nor did he want revenge disguised as royal discipline. He wanted permanent safeguards. None of his children's bequests could ever again be delayed, relocated, or used to settle disputes between older relatives. George mattered as a son before he mattered as a future monarch, and that boundary had to become untouchable. Charles apologized without offering a defense. The monarch placed Prince Philip's recovered compass into William's palm, and admitted that seeing its empty case had changed him. The small object represented guidance passed from one generation to another. Losing it would not have made George poorer in any ordinary sense, but it would have stolen a personal connection that money and titles could never replace. William closed his fingers around the compass, but did not immediately accept the apology. After a long silence, he said trust had to be rebuilt through action. Catherine had protected the children from the crisis, yet the princess could not be expected to feel safe because of another private promise. Her confidence, like his own, would depend upon what Charles did next. Charles then revealed the protective directive he intended to sign. A directive was a written order establishing exactly what officials were required to do. George's trust would receive independent oversight. Anne would become its permanent archival custodian, and the Princess Royal would personally approve every future transfer. Camilla's household would lose all authority over inheritance matters involving direct descendants. The king also confirmed that the private property advisor would be dismissed. The official had concealed the proposal, altered catalog records, and deleted an electronic request. Every copy of the outside legal draft would be formally voided, so the advisor, or anyone replacing him, could never revive it under another name. Father and son signed the directive together, yet their relief arrived too late to preserve secrecy. By morning, a stark newspaper headline had carried the family's private rupture into public view. What Charles and William had resolved behind palace doors now faced a harsher judgment. A nation staring at the image of a young heir, surrounded by adults fighting over his future. By sunrise, the secrecy surrounding the Windsor vault had collapsed. Broadcasters interrupted their schedules, commentators debated the meaning of the king's intervention, and crowds began gathering outside palace gates. Yet one image carried more force than every argument. An empty velvet case printed across a newspaper's front page beneath the words, "George's legacy saved." Suddenly, a private inheritance dispute had become a national test of royal duty. Buckingham Palace released a carefully controlled statement confirming that irregularities involving a private family trust had been corrected. The announcement stressed that George's inheritance remained protected, and no publicly owned crown property had been involved. Crown property meant assets held for the monarchy's official work, rather than personal possessions belonging to individual relatives. That distinction mattered, because taxpayers had not lost anything, yet a child's private connection to his family had still come dangerously close to being restricted. Royal correspondents framed the episode as a personal inheritance dispute, rather than a change to the constitutional succession. The legal order deciding who becomes monarch. George remained firmly in that line. Even so, the attempt to control his personal legacy carried enormous symbolic weight. If palace influence could reach the future king's childhood inheritance, viewers wondered what other private boundaries could be crossed without public knowledge. Camilla watched the morning broadcast alone. The Queen Consort remained silent as a presenter described the crisis as a collision between blended family loyalty and dynastic responsibility. When her name appeared beneath an image of the Windsor vault entrance, she lowered the volume. She had argued that her plan created balance. Now the country saw exclusion, secrecy, and a child placed at the center of an adult grievance. Charles watched the same coverage and rejected advice to distance himself through an anonymous briefing. The king insisted that the written palace statement acknowledge his personal approval of the new safeguards. An anonymous briefing would have allowed aides to influence coverage without publicly attaching his name, but he refused that protection. He had failed to stop the plan early. Now he would accept responsibility for correcting it. Public emotion found its clearest expression outside Buckingham Palace. A small crowd gathered beneath the balcony, while one woman held a handwritten sign reading, "Inheritance is memory." Nearby, parents placed white roses against the railings for George. The gesture was quiet, but it captured the national feeling more powerfully than anger could. The boy's lost security mattered more than the wealth surrounding him. A newspaper then published a documented description of Elizabeth II's sealed instruction. The late queen had forbidden spouses entering through marriage from delaying a direct descendant's inheritance to benefit another family branch. Her boundary shifted sympathy decisively and left Camilla's defense painfully exposed. Charles understood that public judgment had already arrived. The monarch prepared one final family ruling that would protect George, define the Queen Consort's consequences, and close the crisis permanently. Britain had delivered its emotional verdict. Now the king had to decide what remained of his family's trust. The final decision arrived without ceremony. There was no grand audience, no balcony appearance, and no triumphant declaration. Charles gathered William, Catherine, Anne, and Camilla inside the room where the recovered records had first been examined. Before them rested the compass, the sealed messages, and the voided amendment. The king understood that protecting George required more than returning objects. It required drawing a boundary no private relationship could cross again. Charles confirmed that his grandson's full beneficiary status had been restored beyond challenge. Every possession named in the trust had been recatalogued, independently witnessed, and secured under rules requiring William and Anne to approve any future movement. Independent witnessing meant someone outside the dispute had verified each object and its correct location. George's inheritance could no longer disappear behind altered numbers or private instructions. Anne then placed Elizabeth II's sealed directive beside the permanent trust rules. The Princess Royal confirmed that her mother's instruction had been formally incorporated, preventing any present or future spouse from redirecting, suspending, or conditioning a direct descendant's inheritance to benefit another family branch. The late Queen's boundary was no longer merely a private wish. It had become permanent protection. Camilla listened as her authority over the family vault was withdrawn. The Queen Consort did not argue or ask Charles to soften the decision. When he questioned whether she understood its meaning, she answered yes. Her attempt to manufacture balance had produced the opposite result. It had damaged the family's confidence in her and placed George inside a struggle he never created. William accepted the recovered compass, but refused to take it home. The prince requested that it remain secured until his son reached the age originally chosen for him. That decision revealed the truth behind the entire battle. He had never fought for immediate possession. He had fought to preserve George's right to receive his history freely, without pressure, conditions, or another relative's permission. Charles confirmed that the private property advisor had been dismissed. Every altered catalog entry was corrected, and every copy of the proposed amendment was destroyed under trustee supervision, a monitored process ensuring no hidden version could survive. The plan was finished. It could not be revived by another advisor, another office, or another carefully disguised request. Catherine met the monarch's eyes when he apologized for failing to recognize the danger sooner. The princess accepted his words cautiously, telling him that reconciliation would depend upon whether the boundaries were respected after the public attention disappeared. Charles understood. An apology could acknowledge the wound, but only consistent action could rebuild what avoidance had broken. The crisis ended with George's inheritance intact, Camilla permanently removed from decisions concerning it, and William assured that his children's memories would remain protected. Charles had finally chosen his duty as a grandfather over the comfort of silence. The monarchy survived because it confronted the betrayal instead of concealing it. And so the vault closed, not over another secret, but over a protected legacy, a painful lesson, and a promise that Prince George's inheritance would never again become someone else's instrument of power. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.